주었네. 둘도 없는 나의 어머니, 영원한 삶의 별이여. 오직 하나 그대만이 나를 안아주네. 말 못하는 가슴 속 아픔도 그대 먼저 헤아려 주었네. 둘도 없는 나의 어머니, 은혜로운 당의 품이여. 세상에 그대밖에 믿고 살 품 없어라. 바람처럼 이 몸은 흩어져도 천번 다시 만번 다시 돌아와 길이라. 둘도 없는 나의 어머니,
Oh shit! Thank you for noticing. Apparently I was muted. Hello, Jill. I've been muted for like over a half an hour. Thank you for letting me know about that. I must have inadvertently bumped the mute button. See the street signs? Yes, but they're blue. That's useless. You can hear me now, though, right? I mean, okay, well, at the audio readout is moving. That's a good sign. Yay! So how you doing? Estacionamiento sign with an E. Oh, hold up. Let's say on that. Hey, when? Okay, that is Mapuflangun. Rosario, Santa Fe, Argentina. So it's just getting to that because there are two countries where Mapuflangun is spoken and represented in place name. One of them is Chile. I wasn't feeling Chile. And the other is Argentina. We are in Roldan, in the province of Santa Fe, not far from Rosario. Then dale, grande, tejo, ya. Verde, Salvador San Martín. Hacen. Bloody hell. Done. Jaco. Eti. Os. Al. Calete. After me. Al. La Italia. Can't believe I've been on for like half an hour mute. Say it. Side. 102 kilometers. Oh, it was right by Rosa. Ah, there's Roldan. Here we go. 4671. 22,002. Done better. Done worse. Ah, tired. Speedrun takes a lot out of me. Good time doing it. Hey. Already saw. Already did the one about the well. How the only good thing, the only way to do it properly, according to PragerU, is just not to have good intention. I mean, it's probably they just don't have good intention. Hold on, am I? Oh, no. Talking. The movement to the. Yeah, he's got his big city builder fucking banner there.
So, I wanted to talk about 1999. The year of 1999 was a
I wonder how many times he's going to repeat the words 1999.
pretty pivotal year in recent world history. A number of things happened in 1999. First of all, Russia had been devastated by the fall of the Soviet Union. The economy of Russia.
He's more nasal than you.
You had austerity, shock therapy economics, mass unemployment, mass hunger, and the country had been devastated. But 1999 was the year that Vladimir Putin got elected on a platform of fixing the economy with oil and natural gas. 1999 was also the year of the Battle of Seattle. I don't know if folks remember the Battle of Seattle, which was a
okay. What's the over/under on? I have to say I experienced Y2K in, I think, possibly the best possible way. It's like the first time I've ever gone to one of the, and the only time actually I've ever gone to one of those big street New Year's festivals. I was in Berlin at the time, and everybody had sort of canceled their, everybody, like a lot of my friends were out of town visiting family in the countryside and shit. And I was kind of alone and I didn't have any plans. And so I decided I was just going to listen to my mixtape and have a bath with like the bath beads and shit I got for Christmas. And then I get this knock on the door. It's a friend of mine. He's like, yeah, hey, you're going to this thing, right? I'm like, oh, what? Yeah, the New Year's. And he's like, okay, we need to get 2 glasses. And so he just grabs 2 glasses out of my cupboard, hands me one, and the whole night, we were out until like 8 in the morning. It was just like billions of people out in the streets, occasionally shooting firecrackers at each other, and the rest of the time, you had like bottles of champagne just opening up and random fucking people. You just stick your glass out and random people would fill it up. We did not pay for a single drink that entire night, which was good because I couldn't have. I was so fucking broke that I was actually sort of surviving on this log of marzipan that I'd also gotten for Christmas, which is why I cannot stomach marzipan anymore. So that's how I experienced the end of night.
big anti-globalization protest. The World Trade Organization was gathering in Seattle.
I I'm wondering now, is he going to come out on the side of the cops? Is he going to explain why the cops were actually right to do in Seattle? Because that would be consistent.
Labor unions, community groups, as well as environmental activists and others protested. There was a kind of a riot and a heavy-handed police response.
That's literally the exact opposite. There was a riot in response to the attack from the cops. The cops were attacking it before, when it was still quite, totally chill, totally calm. In fact, the chief of police, then chief of police, has since said that, that the protesters were right all along, that the the violence started from the cops, which, I mean, the police presence at these things is inherently violent, showing up with fucking riot shields, guns, and all that shit. I mean, that's already creating a violent climate. It's that you can't ignore that. But even accounting for that, even ignoring that, he admitted that they were the ones who attacked first.
Rubber bullets were shot and tear gas, and it was, an anti-globalization protest that happened in Seattle. In addition to that, Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela. Now, that was the year that, Venezuela had been devastated by the cutbacks and austerity, and there had been a protest movement, the Caracazo, this rebellion that had run.
God, can he pronounce anything correctly? Caracazo. Caracazo.
Caracas against the rising costs of fuel, and in response to that, you had this urban rebellion, the Caracazo. Out of the Caracazo, you got the attempted military coup by Chavez and his allies in the military.
He talks about how he travels to these places, that already makes him some kind of revolutionary hero. But correct pronunciation does not rub off on him at all. I'm not saying that it has to sound like native quality, but knowing that Z in Spanish is just an S sound in most of the Spanish-speaking world would be an improvement.
Chavez went to prison, got out of prison, and then he ran for office on a platform of improving life in Venezuela and got elected in 1999. 1999 was also a pretty important year in my own life, because in 1999 I went to Ecuador.
Oh God, he's going to talk about how he went to Ecuador on his daddy's business trip. And then he saw that there was poverty. Oh, this is going to be good. I've heard him tell this story before, and it is wild.
I was a 12-year-old child, and my dad, who has a side job, really leading nature tours in the Galapagos Islands, I went with my dad to Ecuador. And at that point, Ecuador was gripped by a famine, a man-made famine. They'd been forced to accept the U.S. dollar.
Pretty much all famines are man-made. That's actually kind of the consensus in the field. Pretty much all famines have to do with distribution or with decisions that were made about how to do agriculture that got it wrong. You don't get a lot of just purely natural famines.
As their currency, they'd been forced to, engage in austerity. There were also some, problems related to
Jack Spear. Oh, I felt so bad earlier. You showed up literally as I was clicking the end stream button. Thank you for showing up for the stream, and you're in luck actually on this stream, because you showed up after I realized, thanks to Jill over here, that the mute button had been pressed. I had gone a half an hour muted, and so it was sort of an audioless stream.
The environment, they talked about El Nino or La Nina at the time. In addition to that,
El Nino. They talked about El Nino.
The Asian markets crashed. Remember, the Asian markets crashed at the end of the 1990s. And so there was mass hunger and unemployment and poverty in Ecuador. I was a 12-year-old child, and I saw...
I've been wondering how old this will be. Okay, because he, he has this whole fucking, ubercore aesthetic that makes him seem much farther into middle age than I figured he actually was. So, okay, if he was 12 in 1999, okay, yeah. Then that clarifies.
as I got off the plane in Quito, Ecuador, the extreme amount of poverty that existed. I was kind of blown away. I came to Quito, Ecuador in the middle of a famine, and I had never seen that level of extreme poverty. I saw whole crowds of desperately poor people all over the city of Quito, Ecuador.
I mean, I'm just reminded of how when he told this story in a different video like a year or so ago, Thought Slime described it as he's like the Buddha coming down from the palace and discovering that there is suffering and want. Yeah, and also what they were talking about in 1999 was not La Niña. It was El Niño, very specifically.
And I now know that those were people from the countryside who'd lost their farms and lost their homes and were desperately poor and had piled into the cities. There was just extreme amounts of poverty. 1999 was a pivotal year because 1999, after a decade...
What he does here, like, the history, apart from, like, getting the chronology of Seattle a bit passed backwards, he's not actually strictly wrong about any of the things that he's saying here. But what he does, one of his techniques is he will just sort of barf these facts on top of each other that are tolerably accurate for the most part. And you sort of lull yourself into a false sense of security because you figure, okay, he's being factual. And then eventually there's going to be some bullshit conclusion along the road.
After the fall of the Soviet Union and the results of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Eastern Bloc, starting in about 1999, we started to see the winds of change shift in the world. And with Bolivarianism in Venezuela, with the rise of Russian President Vladimir Putin, we started seeing things shift. And then, you'll remember 9/11, the September 11th attacks.
Okay, what's he going to say about 9/11? I've never heard him talk about 9/11. And one of the things that just gets me, that makes me instantly feel is the fact that there are people who are like old enough to be participating in these sorts of conversations are not old enough to remember 9/11, which I think about a lot. I mean, because if you remember, if you were old enough to actually remember, like, the TV in the U.S. in the weeks following 9/11, like the first week or so, at least, I eventually just stopped even watching broadcast television. I just started watching nothing but fucking DVDs because they were constantly bombarding you with these footage of wreckage and fucking bodies being pulled out and all that shit. I mean, at the same time, interspersed with, like, assholes in gray suits talking about how we need to get in touch with our dark side and unsavory characters and all this fucking stuff, but really just trying to bombard you with the fact that, 3,000 people died and stuff like that. And I can't help thinking about that in this situation right now, where we have a pandemic where we're well on the way to having 2 million dead, pretty much all of them preventable. And there's just nothing. Like, with 9/11, there was a very concerted propaganda effort. Holy shit, okay, thank you. You've made me feel really fucking old there. Don't worry about it. This concerted effort to make this these 3,000 people a shared loss of that we should all feel loss and anger and want revenge for. And then you look at the million fucking people, it's like probably 1.5 million by now at least, dead from COVID, and there's nothing like that. Millions of fucking people are in mourning to some extent, and there's nothing about it. Yeah, it's like there's almost an effort to make sure we do not experience some sort of collective grieving process over it, because the address that we would be laying the cause of that grieving at is not a convenient one. It's just the sense that I have, and I feel like one of the things, Joe Hill is famous for having said, don't mourn, organize. It occurs to me sometimes perhaps actually sort of kicking off a collective grieving process would be a part of organizing. Getting people in touch with just how fucking horrible this is. And so much effort is made to distract them from it. But that's a complete digression. Let's get back to this fool.
And after 9/11, The country was kind of whipped up into a frenzy of patriotism. Some of us, it's interesting to think, some of us weren't even born yet at that point. But
where the hell is Lincoln Valley? This is in Kansas. This is another Kansas stop. Doing a lot in Kansas. Yeah, I mean, and it's all fucking preventable. Yeah, soon enough, 1% of the U.S. population will die of COVID. And the thing is, this is not some mystery disease where we just don't know what to do. Like, this is a situation where we actually know what to do because other countries are doing it and it's worked. It's just that we're being actively, not only is the government not interested in doing, but the government is actively discouraging us from doing it. I mean, it's fucked up.
But the country was whipped up into a frenzy of very frightening patriotism. It was, my country, right or wrong. George W. Bush said that you're either with us or you're against us. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. There were flags everywhere and military parades everywhere, and it was quite frightening. And in that moment, the organized political left.
Yeah, I mean, and I will just say, it was a terrifying time. I mean, when you hear pricks like Paul Krugman, who's old enough to know the reality of it, who's certainly old enough to have remembered. I mean, the prick's older than me. He certainly remembers 9/11 just like I do. And fucking Obama trying to talk about romanticizing the spirit of post 9/11. It's like, that is horrifying. Especially considering that we've come to a point where there are people who are old enough to be following that and listening to that, not old enough to know what the actual spirit of 9/11 was, which was terrifying, racist jingoism combined with just all sorts of domestic human rights taboos just being openly and blithely broken. It looks like probably a fair turnout for his standards, like maybe 30 people. I mean, this is someplace in the middle of Kansas. Not like the huge urban center.
Left completely dropped the ball and made what I consider to be one of their greatest blunders, was that if you listen to what Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and Ward Churchill said in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, you would think that Osama bin Laden was Ho Chi Minh. You would think that Osama bin Laden was Che Guevara. The narrative that they had was that America has gone all over the world and committed all these horrendous crimes, true, and that now America has been attacked and some of what America has done to the rest of the world.
Okay, well, first of all, this is bullshit. Because none of these people actually tried to lionize, not Zinn, not Chomsky, not Churchill, although I'm less familiar with what he said at the time. None of them were trying to say that Osama bin Laden was it. They were saying, they were very clear about this. Well, yeah, I mean, he's talking about 1999. I mean, yeah, weird omission. Though, looking at this audience, a lot of them probably aren't old enough to remember 1999. And being in Kansas, maybe they didn't even hear about it. But, I mean, it was not that Osama bin Laden was like another Che Guevara or anything like that. What they were saying is the reason that there are people who want to actually engage in attacks on the U.S. is that the U.S. is ruining their countries. That people want to pay the U.S. back for that. That's what they were saying. They weren't saying anything about the person of bin Laden. I mean, to some extent to point out that bin Laden got his start as a fucking U.S. asset in Afghanistan. But yeah, I mean, so he's trying to attribute a statement. This is like actually what like the pricks like David Horowitz claimed people like Chomsky and Zinn were saying at the time. Like this is the line that Dick Cheney used to try to dismiss the critique that was coming from Chomsky and Zinn and quite a few other people. Me, I mean, nobody, not that many people heard. I was even more obscure than I am now.
The world has happened to the United States. Again, true, but it's a problematic narrative because...
Oh, well, I mean, since when do you object to problematic narratives, Mr. international bankers and Satan at the fountainhead.
Iraq, that had suffered under horrendous sanctions from the United States, did not attack the United States.
Yeah, but they weren't just talking about Iraq. They were talking about the Middle East as a whole. They were talking about the fact that the U.S. imposes fucking corrupt, brutal, extremely unpopular dictatorships on all the oil-rich countries that they can get their hands on in Saudi Arabia, in North Africa. I mean, in Egypt especially. And that was creating a huge amount of resentment against the U.S. Not only that, of course, the U.S. was bankrolling Israeli apartheid and genocidal violence against the Palestinians. Though, I mean, it's hard to imagine. This is how far back you have to go to when Gaza was just ordinary occupied, as opposed to being under a siege that is designed to starve them to death.
China didn't attack the United States. Vietnam did not attack the United States.
That's not the point.
The people who attack the United States are people that are U.S. allies. Saudi Arabia.
No, I mean, no. The people, the states that they came from are U.S. client states. Yes. Because the thing is, the U.S. client states are ruled by governments that treat their people like shit, are corrupt as fuck, and that most of their populations kind of hate.
Was aligned with the United States. And immediately after 9/11, you'll notice that the government of Libya, led by Gaddafi, was very happy to support the United States and even offered to torture prisoners to help the United States catch the perpetrators of 9/11.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, and in fact, the U.S. ambassador, I think it was, who got killed at Benghazi, was the coordinator of the U.S. torture program in Libya. I mean, one of the embarrassments for the idea that Gaddafi was anti-imperialist to the end is that around the same time, I mean, one of his closest, he was having all these fucking pally photo ops with Tony fucking Blair. And in the Cablegate cables, the WikiLeaks State Department cables that we got thanks to Chelsea Manning, you have a lot of documents about how Gaddafi wanted the U.S. Commerce Department to come down to Libya to help him impose neoliberal reforms on their banking system. I mean, but okay. Yes, but what he said there is true. I mean, Gaddafi just openly just saw an opportunity, I think, to get out from under the heel of the U.S. to some extent, and immediately offered up their support.
And the Syrian government was also said, wow, we've been fighting al-Qaeda types for years, and the Saudis have been trying to overthrow us for years, and we would like to help you. And Iraq supported the United States, and Cuba supported the United States, and many countries around the world said, my goodness, we've been dealing with these extremists and fanatics that the USA has been backing against the Soviet Union and against independent and nationalist governments around the world, and now these extreme...
Yeah, it's interesting. He's acknowledging all this stuff. I mean, Syria, let's remember, I mean, the name Maher Arar ought to be much better known than it is. A Canadian-Syrian dual citizen who had the misfortune of passing through the U.S. He just had a transfer flight, and he got abducted and sent off to Syria and tortured half to death. And the U.S. government pretended that they'd never heard of him. The Canadian government had to be just massively pressured to take an interest. I mean, all of these governments, it's true. I mean, though it didn't last. Syria ended up actually already pissing the U.S. off a couple of years later. They were taking in Iraqi war refugees. They were taking in Iraqi war refugees, and the U.S. said, no, you can't allow these people to seek safety in your country. We want to kill them. And if you keep doing that, then we might just attack you. But somebody reined in Bush at that point, because it didn't actually happen. But a whole lot of Iraqi refugees were ending up in Syria because it's just nearby. They were taking people in, and that already was enough to antagonize the U.S. at the time.
Extremists, kind of like the Contras of Nicaragua, kind of like other extremists the USA has backed around the world, now they've turned around and attacked the United States. So maybe for a moment we can get the United States to understand how bad these policies are of arming these extremists. But the interpretation that the U.S. organized political left had is because it was the United States that was attacked, and because the person who did it was a brown-skinned person from another part of the world, they immediately started sympathizing to some degree or other with the perpetrator.
Except no, that's not. See, I mean, he is like literally taking the Bush administration's narrative. He's making very small tweaks to it, but it wasn't sympathizing with anything. It's pointing out that people who live under regimes like the U.S.-backed regime, fucking Egypt, or in Saudi Arabia, a lot of them absolutely hate it. Hate what the U.S. is doing to their countries. Hate that they're like under the thumbs of these corrupt pricks. Hand over their oil wealth and don't even have anything to show for it. While at the same time they're sort of tacitly backing Israel. Now they're open tend publicly condemn Israeli atrocities, and then they'd get caught like privately congratulating Israel on a job well done and stuff. I mean, see, it's not sympathizing to point out that there are reasons that people Egypt and Saudi Arabia fucking want to hurt the U.S. Because Iraq wasn't the only place in the Middle East that the U.S. was hurting. I mean, in Egypt, for example, the U.S. and Israel crushed Nasserism. They have, I mean, it's not actually hard. He's just creating this ridiculous straw man, and the worst part of this is it's in front of an audience that almost certainly does not remember what the actual arguments were.
The idea was that somehow the Al-Qaeda were freedom fighters or something like that.
Nobody said that. In fact, I mean, the people he listed all... I mean, I don't know about Churchill, but Chomsky and Zinn both condemned Al-Qaeda. They weren't, like, keen on Al-Qaeda at all. They were just talking about why a group like Al-Qaeda can count on people who are willing to die for them as long as it hurts the U.S. in the process. That is what they were talking about. He's making the fucking David Horowitz, Daniel Pipes narrative here. This is Dick Cheney country he's in right now.
And Yuri Kochiyama, who's a very important Asian American activist of Japanese heritage, a friend of Malcolm X. She was in her 80s, she was old, and we can forgive her for this, but she gave a horrendous...
Oh God, I'm sure it means the world to her family. I mean, I don't know, maybe she's still alive. I haven't heard her name in a long time. That Caleb Maupin feels that she can be forgiven.
Horrendous interview where she compared Osama bin Laden to Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh and said he's a hero to the people of the world, and that wasn't the case.
What I would like to just note here, I think everybody in chat's well aware, but just not in chat is watching this at some point. When any claim that he makes about what somebody says in a quoted interview probably needs to be fact checked. Let me see if we can find this Yuri. 9/11. Okay. News. Oh, okay. Well, this quote part, fuck no. I mean, it's telling that almost all, I mean, pretty much all of the sources that put it this way are far right sources or it's fucking NPR. I haven't actually seen anything. Yeah. Well, I think where he's going is that he's saying that the U.S. probably should have, backed, given, Assad in Syria, etc., more support or something like that, which is kind of silly. He says that this is a strategic blunder, but the thing is, and I mean, this is a guy who likes to lecture people for supposedly not being materialist enough. The U.S. is acting in accordance with their fucking interests, and their fucking interests do not include letting Cuba off the hook, for example. They will punish Cuba till the end of time for the crime of becoming independent of the U.S. because they want to set a fucking example.
And you can understand why that message to average Americans didn't go over so well, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, the message that you have totally straw man didn't go over so well, but the thing to remember, I see all this, like, really, this historical revisionism. Like, I've seen people, like, on Twitter getting lots of fucking retweets and everything. Everybody believes WMD and supported the invasion of Iraq. All the leftists, no leftists condemned the invasion of Afghanistan and everything, and it's bullshit. He pretty much universally did. Even a whole lot of liberals condemned those fucking wars. And the polls at the time on the WMD bullshit was 50-50 at the peak. The support for the war was 50-50. Belief in whether WMDs existed in Iraq was also about 50-50. That was the best, despite the fact that all of the media and the government were all selling that line. This idea that everybody just bought it and everybody went along with it, including the left, is just complete nonsense, and it leads to bad analysis. Because the underlying idea that this suggests is that those wars couldn't have happened if people had been against them. The reality is those wars happened despite unprecedented numbers of people protesting against them before they even started. They happened because nobody did anything to get in the way of them. Hello, Ludlow. Oh, I was doing a pretty solid few hours of Duolingo myself. I was absolutely exhausted getting into this. I'm having fun with that speed run, but shit, it gets tiring, especially I really do not have the ideal kind of ergonomic setup for sitting for hours at a time and sitting up straight so that I look good on camera. I can actually see why VTubing is such a popular thing, because then nobody cares about your posture because they can't see it. You come up with it, you can animate it well, and you have done with it.
Right? And if the country's just been attacked and people are fearing for their lives and there's hysteria about terrorist attacks, if the message of the left is, well, we deserved it, we're the bad guys, we're the terrorists.
Well, the thing is, we are the bad guys, though. And it's really kind of weird for him to hear him not acknowledging this. Because usually he kind of does at least acknowledge that. That's, like, not the thing that's wrong with him. We are the bad guys. We've done much worse things than any of those motherfuckers on 9/11 did. We do worse than that every day. At the moment, killing several 9/11s a week from COVID. Just completely deliberately. We know how to stop it. The government doesn't, and that's before we get into the amount of shit that, the amount of people outside of the country that the U.S. government's. Yeah, we are the bad guys, and people do need to hear that. But this idea that they were lionizing Bin Laden, is just bullshit. Oh, thank you. Yes, I bought this. I saw this. It's like one of the very rare Chile solidarity things that I found in Britain. Hello, Tiananmen Square. And when I see any acknowledgement of the struggles in Chile outside of the country, outside of Chile, I find it worth acknowledging. These particular political prisoners, Freddy, Juan, Carlos, and Marcelo, if I remember correctly, they're out now. But there are thousands of political prisoners in Chile right now.
You can understand that, especially in the age of very simplistic, watered-down politics, where everyone has a very short attention span, the response of people to Noam Chomsky, to Howard Zinn, to Ward Churchill was a hostile one. It was
Well, the response of people, first of all, most people did not get to hear what any of them said. I mean, the platforms that Chomsky, Churchill, together, they did not reach a huge number of people. Because you have to put yourself back in the media landscape of 2001. We did not have fucking Twitter and Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. It was not quite as easy to send out something like this and make it go viral. So most people would not have actually even read what you say, or even necessarily heard of him. They, at the most, would have heard the sort of take-down straw man responses that it got from like David Horowitz and Daniel Pipes, Dick Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice. Wow, yeah, I know. Yeah, it is a long, long time. It's a narrow one. He is really going for Mad Men, but without the really good tailoring.
Was an unfriendly one, because they said, look, we feel like we're under threat, we feel like we're under attack, and the organized political left is telling us basically that we deserve it. And
again, God, this is such bullshit. That is not what the organized political left was saying. That was what the right-wingers, and he's, okay, I have to, in this sense, maybe I have to cut him the tiniest bit of slack because he was, 14 years old when this all happened? He was not part of the organized political left, I don't think, when this was going on. But on the other hand, I don't really feel like it because this guy claims to be a fucking journalist. He gets up and claims, that he knows shit and he founds a think tank. Then you can do some fucking research and get let in on the state of the discussion that was going on when you were 14 years old. Some of us were actually actively participating in fucking discussion. Because what you're saying is bullshit.
And kind of making statements that imply somehow the people who did it are heroes.
Nobody said that. I mean, the first, 2 paragraphs of Chomsky's first article after 9/11 were condemning it, saying it was a horrible atrocity. It was probably one of the worst major atrocities in terms of the instant death toll in recent history, and that the victims were pretty much all just, people who just by no stretch of the imagination could be said to have anything to do with anything. It was mostly, he said it was mostly just, cleaners and, low-level, minimum wage workers who were just there because it was their fucking job, as opposed to, the pricks in the corner offices. I mean, that's what he said. This idea that they were calling these people heroes, everybody was, mega careful of that. Because we had this climate of... We were just absolutely over-the-top careful to say, yeah, actually, what happened, that was absolutely fucked up. We're noting it, saying that it happened, saying gotta have a serious conversation about why shit like this happens to us and not other countries. That's what we were saying, and it was very hard. But the thing is, it was also necessary. Sometimes you actually do have to come up, if you're not just a fucking grifter, you do occasionally have to come up to people and say some shit they don't want.
You can understand why the left was isolated. And when
We weren't actually all that isolated, though. I mean, we didn't have great ideas about how to achieve our aims, which is why, we still have pricks, celebrating the protests against the Iraq War as a victory when, know, they didn't stop the Iraq War, which was kind of the point of the thing, and nothing. There was
Bush
no
coming
follow-up.
out of
But we weren't isolated. There were actually, I mean, there was like, in the first couple of weeks, you know, there was a shift. You know, briefly, people were like, oh, okay, holy shit, and, you know, sort of rallied behind the leader. But that wore off pretty quickly because the Patriot Act started coming out and people were starting to notice, liberals in particular, were starting to notice that this was actually kind of scary shit that they were trying to pull against us. And suddenly there was starting to be a fight back, and then Iraq. So the left was not isolated. There were lots of things you can say about us, but we actually were. I think we squandered a lot of opportunities, but we were not totally isolated.
of 9/11 attacked Afghanistan. He had something like 90% approval ratings for his invasion of Afghanistan, and the organized political left was pretty isolated. Now, the invasion of Iraq was much less popular. Europe opposed it, and other forces opposed it. Iraq had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks, so there was widespread opposition to the war in Iraq.
Yeah, it's interesting that he mentions the polls in the one case and not in the other, because the polls on Iraq were just absolutely historically bad. Usually the U.S. manages to have sort of a beginning of war bump on these things, because it's the beginning of the propaganda. It hasn't fallen apart yet. But instead, it was like 50-50 whether people actually the case for war. And actually a lot of people, I think the majority number of polls said even if this were true, they didn't see it just justifying war because it didn't make Iraq an actual. I mean, the polling on Iraq was horrible. I mean, for the Bush administration, it was an extremely unpopular war pretty much everywhere you went.
Iraq, the country at the time of the invasion was about 50-50. But there was a lot of confusion.
Okay, good, yes. Fair play to him. He actually acknowledges it.
On the left because they had this narrative of we are going to speak truth to power. There was a lot of religious pacifism, a lot of candlelight vigils, and a lot of that settlers mentality that average Americans are the enemy. And Ward Churchill.
Wait, the settler. He's not saying a settler mentality. He's saying settlers as in the book. And no, it wasn't saying that ordinary Americans. In fact, the thing is, you could actually really talk to fairly well, he means ordinary Americans as in like white right wingers, like the people who are actually gung-ho in support of these sorts of wars, even when they know it's bullshit, just because they kill brown people. But, I mean, wasn't this, and I mean, he's talking about this with no citations. I should be that by now. But the thing is, I mean, he's talking about a time I remember really well. And it wasn't ordinary Americans. In fact, I mean, you could actually be fairly certain you would find people who didn't like the war against Iraq. It was pretty easy to approach people about that. Unless you were like going to the Young Republicans Club or something like that. Hating the war against Iraq was an easy position to hold. It was not a position that required you to be prepared to defend yourself.
Who was the leading Native American scholar who became kind of a target of Fox News during these years. Ward Churchill, he wrote his essay, Some People Push Back, where he talked about how he said 9/11 was horrendous, but it logically makes sense because of the U.S. sanctions on Iraq that killed all these innocent people. What would you do if you're...
Wait, not just that, though. God, nobody was making it just about that. Everybody had a much broader analysis. All the people he's had a much broader analysis, and I'm not going to repeat myself. He does enough repeating himself for like 10 people. I don't need to add to the repetition surplus that we're having. But just suffice it to say, that was just one of many things that people pointed out about why people specifically in the Middle East and Northern Africa would be pissed off at the U.S. And you look at the polls. They do a poll on, like, think of the U.S. every year. I think Pew does it. And it's interesting. When you go to the Middle East, I mean, the only country where the U.S. has any kind of real basis of support is fucking Israel. Which is not surprising. And the places where the U.S. has intervened most directly have their support is negligible. Rich Fox.
In Iraqi, what can you do to wake the Americans up? Well, the thing was, Iraq didn't attack the United States. So, I mean, it's a
yeah, he's going to beat the straw man the whole time, isn't
fallacious essay. And the essay blames average Americans. It says, you know, average Americans know the U.S. government put these sanctions on Iraq. It's killing people. They're not.
I'm kind of curious whether that's actually true. I don't remember. The main thing I remember I don't know if it's this particular essay. He hasn't really here what he's quoting. No, the main thing I remember from Lord Churchill at the time that really, all sorts of shit came down on him over this, is that he described, you know, the people in the Twin Towers as little Eichmann, and
doing anything about it, and it referred to some people in the Twin Towers as little Eichmanns, compared them to, you know, it was a horrendous anti-populist narrative. But
wait, how is this anti-populist? Churchill, it's worth noting, was actually fairly alone in taking it that far. I mean, the other people he's mentioned, I mean, I'm not sure about Yuri Koyama, but certainly Chomsky and Zinn were not saying shit like that. I mean, it didn't stop people attributing shit like that, but they weren't saying it. And I think we're going to stick with this. Found a good. I mean, this misrepresentation of the post 9/11 period, there's so much bad analysis that result of it, and that's why it's just not surprising that bad analysis guy Caleb Muppet is here to just kind of more or less stan the Daniel Pipes, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney narrative about this. But it is 1 a.m, so it is time to wrap up. Thank you to everybody who joined in. Always nice to see you. Sorry about forgetting to unmute the thing, to anyone who was wondering why there was no sound in this. Weird. I was cropping out some of these messages, so I'll just that up, and then I'm going to just wish you all thank you. And if I'm probably going to take a day off from the Duolingo speedrun tomorrow. Apart from everything, I've got a bunch of footage I need to clip together into content, and that is going to take some. That's going to take some time. And aside from that, I just need to break from it. It's actually kind of tiring, but I will probably be back on that on Monday. My schedule, and for those who are interested and don't already know this, it is at Paper Legal YouTube and Hyper Polyglotting on Twitter. Love to see you there. And so, have a good night. And other than that, I will be back on Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel on Friday at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time.